Hi everybody. Today I want to discuss about diagnosis. I mean, you're often confused because when you have somebody that's mentally ill and you take them in, the provider often doesn't know what they have, so you go through several diagnoses till eventually you get the right one. If you've got the wrong diagnosis, how are they going to give your loved one the right medication? We've been through so many different medications. I'm just going to name a few. I'm going to go through the history of diagnoses and medications that my son, who now has been correctly diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, has been through. Where this is relevant to you is you may have somebody that has schizoaffective disorder. You may have somebody that's misdiagnosed as just bipolar or schizophrenic, or you may just have somebody that's misdiagnosed as a drug addict. Or you'll also have dual diagnosis, which means they are taking drugs, but they also do have an underlying mental condition. Now, schizoaffective disorder, and I'm going to read this, is characterized by paranoid thoughts, definitely has those, delusions, check, hallucinations, check, and obviously you get that also with schizophrenia and with bipolar type, the manic type, I believe. Confusion, definitely so. Disorganized thoughts and behaviors. Catatonia, which is an inability to move normally. Speaking too quickly. Depression or irritability. Hyperactive or a manic mood state. Difficulty concentrating, which they'll often diagnose as ADHD. Changes in appetite, that's a very big one. That's why you need to make sure that your loved ones are sleeping and eating as well as getting their medication. Thoughts of suicide, we've had several suicide attempts. Poor personal hygiene, this is generally when they're not treated properly because they just don't care to take care of themselves. Doesn't matter what you tell them, they just won't do it. And definitely trouble sleeping in my son's case. And when they give them medication, often sleeping way too much. Okay, so when Cory was 4 years old, he was in a daycare program, and they really didn't want to deal with him. And they kept putting him to the front, at the front office, and making me come and get him. And then one day, I got a phone call that he was flipping out, that he was hitting the teacher, that he was turning over desks, he had super strength. So we rushed to the daycare. My ex-husband came and got him, picked him up. He had to kind of wrap his arms inside himself and hold him like this and get him into his car seat. And he was still freaking out. So he'd been freaking out for a very long time. And we got him into his car seat, and we're rushing over to our doctor. And he's trying to get out of his car seat as we're going to the doctor. And eventually, and unfortunately, he wore himself out before we got there. So when we see the doctor says, well, he sounds like he's schizophrenic, which is extremely unusual to diagnose a 4-year-old with schizophrenia, and it's just not commonly done. So he prescribed him Mellaril. I said, okay, followed doctor's orders, gave him Mellaril, took him to the daycare the next day, would take him in, and then I would kind of stand outside and look at them playing, and he was just kind of staring off into space. He was like a little zombie. There was just no Cory there anymore. And I thought, this isn't the way to go. So I got an appointment with a psychiatric day hospital, and I took him to see the psychiatrist there. And the psychiatrist said, take him off the medicine. He's not schizophrenic, he's just ADHD. We're just going to do counseling. So great, big relief. And we did that, and we did counseling 2 or 3 times a week, and it didn't help with the daycare situation because when I put him back in, he got kicked out again. So I ended up having to have him with me all the time. Then when we started elementary school, he was such a handful that the teachers said they wouldn't deal with him unless he was on ADHD medicine. There were several medications. There was Ritalin back then, and there was Adderall. He ended up taking Adderall, and I really hated the way it made him be too. He couldn't eat. His stomach seemed upset. He had to go to the bathroom all the time. So being as a school was basically forcing me at that time to put him on there. You know, you're a bad mom. We're going to report you to defects if you don't do this. Then I would only have him on it while he was at school. On the weekends, he would be off. When he came home, I wouldn't put him on it. And in the morning, I wouldn't, because it's just having a very negative effect. And it was also affecting his ability to sleep. So let's fast forward to middle school now. I completely take him off his medication for middle school, but we were in counseling. So I had him in counseling, and he was constantly getting in trouble. I was getting called in by the teachers, and the teachers were saying, you know, this kid's going to end up in jail. You know, this is what we see with kids that go to jail when they're older. He got in trouble on the school bus, and they stopped the school bus, and I had to come and get him off the school bus. So it was kind of an ongoing problem, but I was not medicating him at that time. Then we get into the high school years. In the high school years, he was a skateboarder. There's lots of peer pressure. Again, I didn't have him on medication in the beginning. And it really became a big problem. So I started to have him see a child psychiatrist, because he was still at about 15 years old. And they said, well, we think he's bipolar. So they started with a list of medications for me. And he did Abilify, that made him suicidal. He did Seroquel, that made him hallucinate. Lithium didn't work. Depakote didn't work. For sleep at night, Ambien, oh my gosh. He would take one, and then he would take the whole bottle, and he would still be awake, but he would be completely blacked out. And to this day, Ambien is terrible for him. I mean, he would go out, he would walk off. I mean, Ambien just did not work. Trazodone gave him restless leg syndrome. So we were trying all these different medications, and nothing was really seeming to work at all. And then at this point, he was starting to believe that he was homeless when he wasn't homeless. So we just kept trying and trying and trying with the child psychiatrist. And, you know, I handed him a book to read about being bipolar, and he said, well, I just really don't think I'm that. So it got to a point where he was put into South Area Abans, which is the bad kid school. And that school actually is not supposed to have them any longer than 6 months. So their curriculum is only 6 months. And if they're kept there, they just keep repeating the curriculum. So they're not really learning anything. And I asked the school, could I homeschool him, but with a virtual school? And back then, virtual school was not real big. They said no. He then got in trouble at South Area Bands, freaked out, broke some stuff on the principal's desk, and they threw him in jail. And they were going to expel him. I had to go to a meeting with the school board for expulsion, but at that point, I'd got the psychiatrist to at least admit that he was bipolar. And that stopped everything in his tracks. I told him, I'd asked you to let me homeschool him with virtual school, but you won't do it. And because he really had no other choice at that point, because he had a mental disability, they allowed me to keep him home with me. And he took the virtual school curriculum, but because it wasn't technically approved as a high school curriculum then, I became the principal, I became the teacher, which is kind of okay because I have a teaching degree anyway. So I had the curriculum set up online, but he was at least home with me. But he was still having all kinds of problems. I kept taking him to the psychiatrist and saying, hey, don't you think he has schizophrenia because he's hallucinating, he's very delusional? And he said, Cory, no, I don't think he has schizophrenia. But I knew he had at least some symptoms of schizophrenia. There was multiple trips to the psych ward. He would be in. It was like a revolving door with him at that point. And he just wasn't feeling well. And none of the medications we took seemed to work at all. And I'm going to go through a list of the medications. I've already mentioned some. Zyprexa made him extremely angry. He would shout at the walls. Abilify, suicidal. Seroquel, hallucinate. Lithium didn't work. Depakote didn't work. Ambien, I already told you about that. Oh, that's catastrophic because he is awake but doesn't realize it. And then he'll just keep taking medication and medication and medication. Benadryl doesn't work alone, but it seemed to work for sleep if you give about 50 milligrams. The hospitals do that a lot. But it will not work on its own without his other medication. Risperidol, homicidal thoughts. The more you up the dosage, the worse the thoughts got. Wellbutrin didn't work. And as I mentioned earlier, trazodone just gave him restless leg syndrome. Anyway, let's fast forward out of the teenage years into the adult years, and I literally had bags of medicine. At one point, he was on like 6 medicines, and he was supposed to take it like 6 times a day. I mean, I can't even remember to take my own vitamins 6 times a day. And if they're not in a hospital and being forced to take it, how are they going to follow that regime? So we're now into his 20s, and he's in Atlanta, and his mental illness is leading him to the streets. Basically, he's got kicked out of everywhere he was at, and he's homeless. And he's working with the Grady ACT team. They work with severe and persistent mental illness, trying to get them counseling, medication, housing. They deal with a lot of the homeless population in Atlanta. So, but he was in and out of Grady Hospital, and nothing seemed to work. So I was able to get him over to the state psychiatric hospital, and I went every day I was allowed to visit. Once he was out of psychosis, I went every day I was allowed to visit, and I would tell him, he's completely religious, he believes, Jesus and God, and that, he may be Jesus. This is wrong. So they started adjusting medication until we brought his personality back, because those of you that have dealt with this, I know you wonder whether your loved one is ever coming back. That sweet, kind person you had just disappears, and I would often wonder, am I ever going to get him back? Is this the way I've got to live? Is his personality always going to be forever changed? Or they'll dope them up so much they're basically like zombies. Or they'll be talking to you like they're drunk, they're slurred because of the medicine that they're giving them. But I am going to tell you, if you follow behind them, there's hope. Because as much as we've been through, and as much as I went daily to the hospital for 8 months, and then we went through getting housing, which he ultimately got kicked out of that, I decided that he was safe enough to bring him home to me. And then that way I can ask him, have you taken your medication in the morning? Have you eaten? I do prepare his food, even if he doesn't really want to eat. I'll try different things like shakes, equate, decaf coffee, because caffeine really makes him feel really badly. It must interact with his medication. So, I'll do like a latte. So maybe fluids that have calories that I can get down. Gatorade, I do Pedialyte. I've tried so many different things when he can't eat. Now we're on vegetarian food. So now he's pretty solid in his diagnosis, even though with Grady we went through a PA trying to tell him he was bipolar and he wasn't schizoaffective. And I had to step in and say, hold on a second. He's seen multiple psychiatrists. You're a PA, not to put down your qualifications, but that's a master's degree. I have a master's degree too. I am not a doctor, and I am not a psychiatrist. And he's seen multiple psychiatrists at the state psychiatric ward that all agree that he is schizoaffective. So we are not changing his diagnosis. But she still wanted to change it, so I had to get him out of there. So we eventually moved, and we got on with Atlanta Psychiatry, and it's COVID right now, so it's telemedicine. And the lady that's working with him right now is great. So we've had a little slip here and there with him taking his Prozac at night, which I said to him, I really don't think you should be taking that at night, because that's kind of a happy pill. I think that should be morning. But he said, I'm following the doctor's regime. Okay, well, that's why he was hospitalized. But all we needed to do was lower the dosage of that and switch it to the morning. So the medications that he's on right now are a lower dose of Zyprexa. Remember, I was telling you that he was screaming at the walls with that? He had too much. And the Prozac. So I'm not going to give you the milligrams or any of that, but that's what works for him, and it's not going to work for everybody. Everybody's body chemistry is completely different. But he only has a nighttime dose now, and then he has a morning time dose. So that's more manageable for both of us. And he's back to his old hobbies. He's able to be in college. His personality is the fun, loving, kind person that he is. And it's truly a blessing to me. I love my son to death, and we're on this journey together. So please advocate for your loved ones. Stick with them. Don't give up on them. Don't think you're never going to get their mind back, because you can, but you have to work with them. Did I have to give up my life to do this? Yes, but I'm quite happy to do it because I'm his mother. And I love him. So what are the things that we really need to make sure our loved one is healthy? Obviously, medication. They don't need to be on illicit drugs. That doesn't help. They need to sleep. They need to eat. They need to hydrate. They need love. They need support. They need you not to give up on them. They need kindness. And they also need you to be very, very calm when you're dealing with them if they're becoming manic, or in general, because it's hard for them if somebody's coming at them in an angry manner. So stay calm. You got to have lots of patience. Have a great day.